In this video, we will show you how to replace your rear brakes. Let's get started. Okay friends, let's get started on our job. The first thing you need to do is make your way in the trunk and turn off your air ride suspension. The next thing that you'll want to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheels are off the ground. Continue on to removing your center cover. After you have that off of there, remove all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. With the wheel out of the way, we have a nice clear view of our rear brakes. Let's start over by the caliper. We're going to have to push back the piston that's located inside the caliper, just enough that we can remove the caliper from the area. I'll use a small pry bar, carefully get in between this area, gently pry up against the caliper and the rotor. Once you have a little bit of movement, continue on along the backside. Now along the backside of the caliper, you're going to find 2 10mm headed bolts that hold the caliper to the rear differential. Let's remove the pair. Inspect your hardware as you remove it. Now from the outside, you'll find along the top of your outer brake pad, you have a little tab that you can carefully press down. While I do that, I'll come in between this area and gently pry the caliper away from the rear differential. Now let's remove the outer brake pad using our pry bar. We'll get right in between this area, gently separate this. Remove the outer brake pad from the caliper. It's a good idea to give it a quick inspection to see how it's been wearing and set that aside. At this point, we can continue on to removing the inboard pad. Go ahead and grab onto that and pull it right out of there. You'll find that it has 3 tabs that are supposed to hold it into the caliper piston. The next thing you want to do is push in the caliper piston. We'll use our caliper compression tool, come right inside the center of that piston, and gently press it into the caliper. Once you have your tool out of the way, continue on to paying attention to where the caliper piston goes into the caliper. There should be a seal. If you see any fluid in this area, that means you have a caliper leak and you have to replace the caliper. This one looks good, so we'll continue on. Let's set this aside, putting no pressure on the flex hose. Now we can move along to the back side of the backing plate. Along where your ABS sensor is, you're going to find a rubber plug on the backing plate. Use a pick or a small screwdriver and carefully remove that rubber plug. Give it a quick inspection and set it aside. Now inside of this hole, down along the bottom area, you're going to find some teeth. It's actually a cog in there. We need to use a small prying device and get inside here and turn this cog one direction or the other. What we need to do is de-adjust the emergency brake shoes located on the inside of the brake rotor so they're away from it. That way there we can remove the rotor from the area. Now I can start turning the cog. While I do this, I'm only gonna go a couple clicks in one direction. After that, I'll continue on by trying to spin the rotor. I wanna see if it gets easier or harder to turn. The easier it gets, that means you're heading in the right direction. So here's a look at what's going on behind the rotor. Pay attention to that cog. With the emergency brake shoes de-adjusted, remove the rotor. Once the rotor is out of the way, clean and inspect your emergency brake shoes. Once you have the rotor out of the way, put a collection receptacle under the area. It's important to make sure you clean and inspect your emergency brake shoes. The next thing you'll want to do is clean up the mating surface on the end of the axle where your brand new rotor is going to sit. Once you have that area cleaned up, continue on along to the area of the differential where the caliper needs to sit. On this lip and directly underneath it, you'll find that you have a tin. We'll use a small hammer and push this out of place. Go ahead and set that aside. Do the same to the other. Once you have those off of there, it's important to make sure you clean the area where your brand new tin's going to sit. You have this area where my index finger is, down along here towards the center, and along the back side. Once you have this one cleaned up, do the same to the lower. Once you have those areas cleaned up, continue on by adding a little bit of high temperature caliper lubricant to each of the areas that you just finished cleaning. Now in with your brake kit, you'll find that you had some brand new tins. Install those now. Now we can coat this area with some copper anti-seize. Now let's clean our 3 braking surfaces on our brand new rotor. We've got one along the front, turn it around, we'll get this area. And then you want to make sure you get inside this area where your emergency brake shoes will ride. Let's install this on the vehicle. Now let's move along to preparing our caliper. On the caliper, you're going to find 2 caliper sliders. Those are going to be located inside of the slider boots. Carefully press that slider out to one side or the other. Just press this through. Carefully give it a little tug. You don't need to fully remove it. We just want to bring it to the far end of the boot. At this point, you want to inspect the slider. Make sure it doesn't look like it's rotted or damaged in any way. That's going to restrict the movement of the slider inside of this area. Assuming it looks good, continue on with some high temperature caliper lubricant. We'll lubricate directly inside this boot, trying to make its way all the way up into this area. Use a little bit more of that lubricant and lubricate the slider pin itself. You don't need to put very much lubricant on this because as you slide it in, the majority of it will be taken off by the boot. Let's slide this back into its original position, making sure that the boot is sitting on the grooves on either side of the pin. After that, work it around back and forth. And then continue on to the other slider pin. Do the exact same thing. We'll slide that into its original position as well. Press the boot onto the groove. Work it in. Let's continue lubing the caliper piston. We'll go right around the metallic aspect. Once that's lubricated, continue on with the lubricant along the back side of each of these 2 ears. By adding lubricant in this area, it'll help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Continue on to installing your brake pads. You'll find that the inner pad has 3 tabs that press directly into the center of the caliper piston. While we put this in, be extremely careful not to get any lubricant on your friction material. Once you have that in there, continue on to the outer pad. Now, when you go to install your pads, you'll find that there's 2 pads that have this tab that protrude out. One will be on one side and the other will have it on the opposite. You want to make sure you have it in the proper positioning, so when it's in the proper placement, that locking tab will be facing up. Let's take this and slide it in position on the caliper. Now we can take that caliper and put it in position on the vehicle. When you do this, pay attention to the slider pins that you just lubricated. You want to make sure that you have those pressed in the outward position. Let's slide this down into the proper positioning. Now I'll take care of the top slider, push that out as well, and roll this into place. Once you have it in the right position, continue on with your 2 caliper slider bolts. We'll start these in and snug them up. Once each of those are snug, torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Let's reinstall our wheel. Start on all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts and then snug them up. Now let's make our way to the back of the backing plate. We're going to have to readjust the adjuster for the emergency brake shoes. When you do this, you need to be careful not to over-adjust it, meaning you're pushing the shoes out too far up against the rotor. You only want them to barely touch up against the rotor so you can feel a tiny bit of drag. It should still spin. If you try to spin it and it only goes a little bit and then stops, you're going to have too much friction, you're going to have an overheating condition, and you're going to cause some damage. Let's just go ahead and adjust this. An easy way to test it once you've made the adjustment is to make your way inside the vehicle and test the emergency brake functionality. Once you feel as though you have it adjusted properly, continue on with your protective plug. Let's make our way back into the trunk and turn on the air suspension. With the wheels safely on the ground, torque each of these lug nuts in a crisscross manner. Once your lug nuts are torqued, continue on with the center cover. Okay friends, we finished installing one side of our rear brakes. The process will be the exact same thing for the other side of the vehicle. Once you've done that, continue on by pumping up the brake pedal inside the vehicle and double checking the fluid in your master cylinder. Aside from that, take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.